In our last lesson, we continued filling out our investing spectrum with CDs, stocks, and bonds. And today we're going to delve a little deeper into stocks. So we're going to start off with this video just about stock basics. And your goal is to fill out this next slide that's talking about recapping our movies. So as you watch the video, take some notes on anything that it talks about in terms of stocks, and then we'll go over it together at the end.
A stock is a share of the ownership of a company. As the owner of a stock, the stockholder, you have a claim on the company's assets and earnings. Suppose Steve is starting a company, Pies R Us. He needs $100,000 but doesn't want to borrow from a bank. Instead, Steve invests $10,000 of his own money and finds 9 other investors who are willing to invest $10,000 each. In return, he gives each investor a certificate that represents 10% of his company. Each certificate represents 10% of the company's assets, the building, the pie pans, and the baking materials, and 10% of any future earnings. After 1 year, the company is doing well, and the company's total value increases to $200,000. This means each share of the company is now worth $20,000. $200,000 divided by 10 shares. That's twice the original $10,000. The original investors can sell their stock in the company to other investors for a 100% profit. This is how stocks work. Stocks are bought and sold daily on the major exchanges.
So if we review this movie, some of it is already information that we learned from Dave. The first piece of big information in the movie is just the definition of a stock. And that is, again, a share or a piece of ownership in a company. So the more shares of stock you own, the more you own of the actual company. The second thing that they mentioned in the video that we may have said earlier is that the stockholder is the actual person who owns the stock. So I liked this picture from the movie where he is actually putting out his hand and it looks like he's holding the stock. So if you own one stock or a million stocks, you're considered a stockholder. Again, in the movie, they went over how stocks gain or lose money. So if the company does really well, the stock price or the value of the stock is going to increase. If the company is not doing very well, if it's doing really poorly, the stock price or the value of the stock is going to decrease. The last thing that they mentioned in the movie, which I thought was really noteworthy because we're going to be talking about it in the next lesson, is that the stock exchange is where you actually go to buy and sell stocks. And I like the little graphic they put up because it had these little buildings. And on the top of the buildings, they had these acronyms. The two most common acronyms that we will refer to when we talk about buying and selling stock at a stock exchange is the NYSE and the NASDAQ. So the NYSE stands for the New York Stock Exchange, NASDAQ, National Association of Securities Dealers Automated Quotations. But again, it is one of the major stock exchanges where you can buy and sell stock. At this point, I want to delve a little deeper into the math behind figuring out what percent of a company you would own if you owned a specific number of stock shares and what those specific stock shares would be worth. So we're going to practice doing this math by using Excel rather than you typing out a bunch of equations. And so in this scenario, we're pretending that you and 4 random people have decided to start a lawn and landscape business. And for your business, you're actually going to look for $1,000 to start up your business. So maybe you need $1,000 to buy the lawnmower and the mulch and, I don't know, the clippers or something like that. So what you decide to do is you and your 4 friends split up that $1,000 and you each contribute a specific amount of the 1,000. And so that correlates to the number of shares purchased. So if you'll see here, friend number 2 has 6 shares purchased. And so he's technically invested the most money into the company versus friend number 4 only has 2 shares. So he's invested the least amount. Now, what we're going to try to figure out is, okay, how much does that actually correlate with in terms of what percent do I own? Because none of these people own 100% of the company, but they do own a portion. And if they own a portion, what is their stock actually worth of that $1,000? So what I want you to do is open an Excel spreadsheet and you're just going to copy over that table that I made. So then we're going to take a look at what percent does that mean they own of the company. If they own however many percent, how much money does that actually equal? And then we'll take a look at the dividends. So if you're in Excel, just make sure that you remake this table. So the first thing we have to figure out before we can figure the percentage that each person owns of the company is the total number of shares. So we're going to click in that total shares box and we're going to just add up the boxes in Excel. Now you could do this using a calculator, but I'm just going to have Excel do it for me. So I want to find out what the total equals. I'm going to start with equals, and then I'm just going to say it's 5 plus 3 plus 6 plus 4 plus 2, and hit enter. So in total, there are 20 shares of stock, and me over here, I own 5. Now to figure out the percent that I own 5 out of 20. So those words out of mean that we're going to divide. So in my percent ownership, I'm going to type in equals again because I want to figure out what my percent equals. And I own 5 divided by 20, or 5 out of 20 shares. So I own 25%. Now, if yours doesn't show up with a percent sign here, under this number box, you can change it to say percentage, and it should show you the actual percent. So for this person, they own 3 shares out of 20. So equals 3 out of 20. They own 15%. This person owns 6 out of 20. This person owns 4. And this person owns 2 out of 20. Now, if I was super nervous about these numbers, it should equal 100%. So I could say equals 25 plus 15 plus 30 plus 20 plus 10, and I would get 100%. So the next thing I want to figure out is if I own 25% of the company, what does that actually mean I own in terms of dollar amount? So I own 5 shares, that equals 25%. How much money do I actually get? Now, if you remember, we started up the company with $1,000. So I own 25% of this $1,000. Friend number 3 owns 20% of the $1,000. When we hear the word of in terms of math, that's always going to mean we multiply. So I'm going to say equals 25% of, or multiply, of $1,000 and hit enter. So that means my stock is actually worth $250. So 5 shares is equal to $250. If I want to figure out what friend 1 has, they have 15% of $1,000. So they only have $150. Friend 2 is 30% of 1,000. Friend 4 is 20% of 1,000. Sorry, friend 4 is 10% of 1,000. And again, if you're nervous about these numbers, our starting investment was 1,000. So if you deleted this and you added up 250 plus 150 plus 300 plus 200 plus 100, we should get $1,000. The next column on our chart talks about dividends. So just a reminder, yesterday I talked about the Monopoly square that says, ooh, the dividends. So here's a little picture of it. But a reminder of what a dividend actually is. So in the stock market, if your company is doing really, really well and it's making a lot of money or profits, they may take that profit and pay it out in little bits to the stockholders or the shareholders. And that's called a dividend. So in our example, we're going to say that we have 15 clients. They're going to pay us $40 a week to mow their lawns. But we have some expenses. We have to pay for the gas, or we have to pay for the mulch or something like that. So after all is said and done, we're actually only going to earn $32 per lawn in profit. So at this point, we're like, yay, we're making money. Let's take that profit and let's break it out and give it to each of our shareholders in the form of dividends. I want to distribute my profits. So when we figure this out, the first thing we have to figure out is what is the total amount of money that I can actually distribute. So it's the total amount of weekly profit. In this case, I have 15 clients and I make $32 per lawn. So we're going to take that 15 and we're going to multiply it by 32 to figure out the total amount of money that I've made in the week. Now, if you hop over to your Excel sheet, you can just do that in an empty cell. I can type in equals 15 clients times $32 per client. That means my total amount of money I made this week was $480. So I should get a portion of that. Friend 1, friend 2, friend 3, friend 4 should all get a portion of that $480 in the form of my dividends. Now, if I look back, I need to figure out, okay, how much should I get or how much should my friend get? And that's what we're considering the profits per share. So in Excel, if I want to figure out how much of that money I should get, because I own 25% of the company, I should get 25% of the profits. So I'm going to say equals 25%. And again, here's that word of. I should earn 25% of. So we're going to multiply the total profit. So $480. So for me, I actually get to walk away with $120 out of that $480 in dividends because that was 25%. Friend number 1 gets 15% of the $480, so they get $72. Friend number 2 gets 30% of 480. Friend 3 gets 20% of 480. And friend 4 only gets a measly 10% of 480. And so if we take a look at this, friend number 2, who owns the most shares and the highest percent, should walk away with the most number of dollars in terms of dividends. Friend 2, who has the least percentage and the least number of shares, gets the least amount of dividends. Again, if I took all of these numbers and I added them up, it should equal my total profits for the week. At this point, I want you to practice doing all of those equations that we just did together. So I'm going to give you this new scenario. You and 4 friends are starting up whatever business you want to. So maybe you're going to sell, I don't know, ferrets. And for your ferret selling business, you need $325,000. So you're going to decide the number of shares that you want each of you and your 4 friends to have in terms of your ownership. And then we're going to say that you make daily profits of $487. And of those profits, we're going to divide those after a week. So what we want to do is set up this table again in Excel. If you have your old table, what you could do is you could just highlight everything and press, your delete button. Again, press delete for your number of shares, your profits are different, and your value is different. In this case, the total value we said was $325,000. And then I don't care what you do for share numbers. You can totally make up these numbers of shares. So you can put in, I don't even know, you can just type in random numbers that you want for shares. So they don't have to be the same as mine. They can be whatever you want. Then the first thing you're going to do, remember, is to find your total number of shares. So you're going to add this entire column up. So for me, I'm going to be adding each of these cells together. Once you find your total number of shares, whatever it is, you're going to go work on the percent of ownership that actually means. So if you look, I have a pretty low number, and I own this amount of shares out of, so I'm going to divide the total number, 15,181. Okay. Friend number 1 owns this many shares out of 15,181. Okay. And I'm going to continue to divide my shares or my friend's shares by the total number of shares as we go down the line. All right. And then again, if you're adding all these numbers up, they should equal 100% in terms of shares. The next thing you have to do is, if I only own 3% of the company, what does that mean in terms of the total amount? So my company in this case, my favorite company, was worth $325,000. I own 3% of, so I'm going to multiply the total. Okay, friend one owned 32% of the total. Okay, we only got 1% of the total here, 59% of the total, and 5% of the total. Again, if I added all my numbers up, it should equal that $325,000, which is good. All right. Now we would be at the point of you determining the dividends. So before you can figure out how much money each person makes, you need to figure out how much money you made in the week. So in this case, you made $487 a day, and there are 7 days in a week. So in Excel, I'm going to take equals 487 times the 7 days in a week. So in my week, in our ferret business, we made $3,409. Now I should get 3% of, so I'm going to multiply that $3,409. So I'm going to get $102 in dividends. All right. So you're just taking your percentage of ownership times whatever you have for your profits. All right. And as you see, I've been clicking the cells and using some cell references. If you would rather just type out the numbers, so if you'd rather type out 5% times 3409, that totally works too. And again, here my total should be 3409 if I added them all up. I've got some rounding going on, so I'm just a little off. Okay, so if you had a little bit different numbers, that's good, but I want to make sure you understand the math or the equations behind figuring out the percentage of ownership, the value of your shares, and if there are profits, how you split those up into dividends, because this will be on the test.